You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday, the 3rd of February 2014. Detectives investigating 50 very serious child grooming sex cases in London. New Peterborough sex ring case. Chinese New Year, BBC subtitle blunder reads "Welcome to the Year of the Whores." Catholic France, adieu. Welcome Islam. Islamic extremism on the rise in Sweden. 700 Britons fighting in Syria terror groups, warns Hollande. On the highway to heaven, Ohio biker is buried in leathers astride his beloved 1967 Harley Davidson in a huge transparent casket. Jihadists flock to Turkish camps to plan new atrocities in Europe. China, slaughterhouse said to process horrifying numbers of whale sharks annually. Thought for the day, the lands of Araby. And finally, painting the church Scott style. UK news. Detectives investigating 50 very serious child grooming cases in London. Detectives are investigating 50 very serious child grooming sex cases in London. Shock new figures revealed today. A specialist unit set up to investigate allegations of grooming and child abuse has received a total of 500 allegations within the last 6 months. These include around 40 to 50 cases of a very serious nature, a senior Scotland Yard detective said. So far, the sexual exploitation team has launched 4 separate full-scale investigations into suspected child grooming gangs as a result of the allegations. These inquiries are each said to involve several victims and a number of perpetrators. The development comes a year after 7 men from a grooming gang in Oxford were jailed for life for a horrific series of sex assaults on vulnerable girls aged between 11 and 15. Police also said that all frontline officers in the Met are to get training in how to recognise signs of grooming and child sexual exploitation. Detective Superintendent Terry Sharp, the head of Met's sexual exploitation team, which was set up 9 months ago, said, "A number of recent high-profile investigations has rightly brought the issue of child sexual exploitation to the fore in everyone's consciousness." He added, "In the last 6 months we have had over 500 referrals relating to children suspected of being sexually exploited." A victim of the Oxford sex ring is helping police in London to identify victims of child grooming gangs. The woman, who was 12 at the time when she was first assaulted, has filmed a video for frontline officers describing her ordeal and her dealings with the police. Now 22, the victim, known as Girl A, came into contact with police hundreds of times during her 3-year ordeal. All uniform officers will be shown the video in which the girl highlights how she was ignored by police. In an interview with the Standard, she told how she was approached by the grooming gangs. World at 8. These poor girls had been ignored for years. Their sin was being white and their abusers usually Muslim, or as the plod like to say, Asian. If they'd been black or their abusers or rapists white, rich or famous, we would have heard about them years ago. They simply don't sell papers. New Peterborough sex ring case. Peterborough, 4 Asian men accused of involvement in a child sex ring in Peterborough will stand trial in Cambridge in March. Yasir Ali, 28, Mohammed Aslam, 23, Daaim Ashraf, 19 and Akash Yasin, 18, are said to have sexually abused 8 14-year-old girls. The charges include sex trafficking and rape, but the indictment, which is likely to feature more than 20 counts, has not yet been finalised. They did not appear at the Old Bailey for the hearing. World at 8. And Farage the Garage says we are racists? This abuse is racist. It is anti-white and anti-Christian for the most part. Chinese New Year, BBC subtitle blunder reads "Welcome to the Year of the Whores." Friday saw the start of the Chinese New Year, with this being the year of the horse. Unfortunately, the BBC News subtitle system didn't understand the memo quite right and instead declared this was the year of the whores, to much of the embarrassment of the channel. Welcome to the year of the whores. People round the globe celebrate, read the subtitles. Noticing the blunder, a number of eagle-eyed viewers were quickly able to grab a screenshot and post it on Twitter. This isn't the first time the BBC's subtitles have had somewhat of a malfunction. The Archbishop of Canterbury has been referred to as the Arch-Bitch of Canterbury, while during coverage of the Queen Mother's funeral there was a call for a moment's violence. European news. Catholic France adieu, welcome Islam. Minarets instead of church towers, muezzins instead of church bells. A different France. The secular and libertarian magazine Causeur asks, is this the end of the bell towers of France? Until last week the church bells of Boisé, a town of 500 inhabitants in the district of the Seine, were ringing every half hour. Then the Administrative Court of Paris has stopped the bells as an alleged violation of the 905 law on the separation of church and state. The story seems a perfect epitaph to an essay that appeared 10 years ago by Daniel Hervé-Lauger, Catholicisme, la fin du monde. The French sociologist used the term exculturation, which doesn't depict a battle still open, but a game over, for French Catholicism. World at 8. We haven't heard church bells over here for years, and no one has complained, have they? Islamic extremism on the rise in Sweden. Violent Islamic extremists in Sweden pose an increased threat to the public, a government investigation found on Friday, with the prime risks coming from those who have travelled to war zones for military training. The report, headed by investigator Doris Hong-Rydam and presented on Friday to Democracy Minister Birgitta Olsson, concluded that there was an increase in the risk of violence from Islamic extremists against Swedish society and individuals in Sweden. Sweden was found to be a desirable target, with the prime target area being persons who were considered to have offended or insulted Islam. World at 8. If we lived in a real world with real people and not people who live their lives through their computers or TV, there would not be a country in the world who didn't want to offend or insult Islam. That's the purpose of Islam, to upset everybody, isn't it? 700 Britons fighting in Syria terror groups, warns Hollande. François Hollande, the French president, says up to 700 Britons are in the Middle Eastern country, twice as many as previously feared. Twice as many British fanatics may be fighting in Syria. After talks with David Cameron on the conflict, François Hollande, the French president, told a press conference that up to 700 Britons were in the Middle Eastern country. Mr Hollande said that Britain and France shared the same level of young people who had headed out to join extremist groups. Downing Street played down his comments immediately and stood by estimates that 350 Britons are fighting in Syria. However, senior Whitehall sources accept that the numbers are increasing constantly and that estimates are based only on those the police and intelligence services know to have travelled out. Syria is the biggest attraction for would-be jihadists, and MI5 and counter-terrorism police fear Britons will be trained in terror techniques there. Last month an Al-Qaeda defector in Syria told the Daily Telegraph that Britons were being encouraged to return home to carry out atrocities. Fighters are trained in how to make and detonate car bombs and suicide vests and are sent back to set up terror cells, the defector from the Islamic State of Iraq and Al-Shams claimed. World at 8. They aren't British, they aren't English, but they are traitors. World news. On the highway to heaven. Ohio biker is buried in leathers astride his beloved 1967 Harley Davidson in a huge transparent casket. The family of an Ohio biker has fulfilled his dying wish by burying him astride his beloved Harley Davidson in a see-through casket. Dressed in his leathers and sunglasses and sitting on top of his 1967 Electra Glide Cruiser, Billy Standley, who died on Sunday, was taken for one last ride. The body of the 82-year-old, who died of lung cancer, was visible through the transparent plexiglass coffin that his bike had been placed. World at 8. Good for him. Jihadists flock to Turkish camps to plan new atrocities in Europe. Al-Qaeda groups operating in Syria have set up 3 bases in southern Turkey to train foreign fighters for terrorist attacks on the US and Europe, according to intelligence sources. Details of the 3 camps were disclosed yesterday by Major General Aviv Kochavi, the head of Israel's military intelligence, confirming fears expressed by his counterparts in Britain and the United States. James Clapper, Director of National Intelligence in the US, said that a Syrian affiliate of Al-Qaeda, Jabhat al-Nusra, had aspirations to carry out attacks on American soil. World at 8, and they want all these so-called Syrian refugees, aka terrorists, to come to the UK and Europe. Are they all bloody mad? China, slaughterhouse said to process horrifying number of whale sharks annually. A recently released report by a non-governmental organisation found that about 600 whale sharks and basking sharks are processed by a factory in China every year. Whale sharks are being slaughtered. That's the shocking news from a report issued by Wildlife Risk, a non-governmental organisation. A 3-year investigation provides evidence that a factory in southeast China is cutting up about 600 of the 21-tonne fish a year. It's illegal. Whale sharks are protected species under Chinese and international law. But it's easy to understand why. A single carcass is worth about $30,000. The shark meat is sold for food, the fins are sold to restaurants for shark fin soup, the skin is sold to manufacturers for bags, and the oil is sold to companies that make fish oil supplements. The factory is also reportedly killing and processing other species under international protection, including basking sharks and great white sharks. World at 8. Laws and decency concerning anything edible from the animal world doesn't affect the bloody Chinese. They can become as rich and as sophisticated as they like, but they are still a country of hungry peasants. I'm surprised they haven't yet gone for cannibalism. It would certainly get their numbers down and preserve certain endangered animal species. I'm sure a nice sweet and sour could cover the porky balls taste. Thought for the day. Lands of Araby? Arabia. That vast and uncharted landmass, of which the only modern viable feature is Kuwait and Dubai, has produced only Islam in the last 800 years or so. That highly travelled and pandemic disease that even now is encroaching once again into Europe and the northern hemispheres. Within Dubai especially, more people use energy and power per capita than anywhere else in the world. And let's make no mistake about it, had the Europeans not sought out oil in Arabia, these self-same Qataris, Kuwaitis and Saudis would still be herding their camels around this land, and indeed most of the Western world would be cycling or might have invented something more user-friendly and cheaper, one never knows. However, even amidst the source of the high-rise buildings, one even pertaining to be the highest on the planet, and the almost obscene luxury of the nouveau riche, these sources of oil and the vast and prolific sources of fossil fuel are due to run out in around 10 years' time. And this could be, in part, the reason why almost all Muslim immigrants go to Europe, not back or to what should be their fatherlands. I believe that the Saudis and the rest don't encourage any form of migration into their lands, even from the followers of their own religion, Islam. Also, of course, Moses is not popular with the Jews because he turned right coming out of Egypt, not left, and therefore got the milk and honey, but not the oil. I watched a programme on Arabia last week, mainly for the wonderful animals indigenous there, but couldn't help but notice the sort of people that walked the street of these huge new towns. They are obviously all upper class and all with money. The women are burqa'd but with stylish western shoes and good jewellery. There is little or no poverty that we are allowed to see in these cities of the future as they were described. In fact, it was a party political broadcast for Arabia and Islam. Come look at me and see how big my gun is sort of programme. However, it did touch on the subject of what these wealthy Arabs are looking towards in the event of their main source of wealth and high living going walkabout in the future: solar panels. They have just built, along the ancient Arab architectural lines, a vast town called Masdar just outside Abu Dhabi. These buildings nestle underneath a huge complex of solar panels which give them all the power they need. This is pretty obvious as the sodding sun shines there all the time in a virtually cloudless sky, not like the poor little scraps of panels we see in our northern climes, and note, so far wind farms haven't made it out there either. Looking at this new town, I was struck by the almost Stepford Wives aspect of it. Everyone looked the same, all rich and mostly of breeding ages. There were no beggars and no homeless, and we didn't see the inside of one of these houses, so I presume no slaves either. The whole thing looked artificial and slightly off-key, but then I'm a suspicious person when it comes to certain peoples. So why, if they've solved the problem of energy for living but not necessarily driving around, aren't they building more of these solar towns? Dubai especially must use millions of kilowatts per hour, and is the thinking use it all up and then buy up all the remaining oil in the world? They could do as they have the money. Poor old Europe, us and the States, doesn't. Russia is emerging as a great user of energy, as is China, so it should be interesting times, my friends. These rich Arab households also use more water per person than anyone in the world, and in Dubai they have a huge daily water festival and fountains that reach high into the sky. This is just to tell everyone that water is no longer on short rations but available to all. In fact, it just looks like a tremendous waste of water and time to me, and this too will run out about the same time that oil does. In fact, in the desert, looking like green sequins from space, are the farms that they've brought into being. These vast circular areas of green have been made possible by the vast quantities of artesian wells underneath the desert, which are pumped up into circular pumps which spray all day, every day, onto the crops. But as all good things and bad things come to an end, these too will dry out in the not too distant future, and the desert will revert to being just that, a desert. So the theatre is set. Vast energy gobbling towns, people with what look like rich robots or a very selective Islamic society who are consuming vast amounts of food, the production of which relies on water taken from the underground and due to run out fairly soon. Due to their large financial gains from oil, they can afford to import almost everything and anything, but when oil runs out, what happens then? Will hundreds of new towns suddenly spring up like Mazda out of the desert? And what will happen to the abnormally large skyscrapers in their vast cities with no lights or energy? Now, I'm not concerned on a personal level with what happens to these people or their offspring, but I am concerned that knowing the Eastern mindset as I do, what long-term plans have they in mind? I believe it concerns Europe and us to a very great degree. Why do you think that most, if not all, Muslim countries, not in Arabia, are ejecting their people to Europe and the States? We know the Muslim Spring was orchestrated from within these countries and in fact is still going on with Syria. And now does Qatar or Kuwait take in immigrants? Have they offered to take in the thousands of Syrians who, in not winning the rebellion against Assad, are now fleeing that country? Why not go over the border to Jordan or further to Kuwait? Why not go to the poster child country that advertises Islam as its very best? Why come to Europe? Could it be that the society in, say, Qatar is too snobby to take in their Muslim relations, or is there a more sinister reason? Do the lands of Araby know that their time is limited due to peak oil, or rather lack of it, and will have all their money and work cut out to give its already incumbent citizens a standard of life they're obviously very well used to, and the pressure of accommodating thousands, if not millions more Muslims, as Europe is expected to do, will prove too much for them? When you see new towns like Mazda, which look like something from the Star Wars films, peopled with clone-like followers of Islam, you realise that nothing Muslims do is without an end product. They are finding ways of still living comfortably without oil revenues and very much water, and what they don't do themselves they can afford to bring in. Why? Because they keep the population of Arabia fairly low. There is an obvious financial divide, and nothing is seen of the foreign workers who no doubt built and will build the new solar system cities. But these workers are expendable, and unlike new migrants will not require much in maintenance. So that means that all the new Muslims being born will be in either Europe or the US. Thus the Kuwaitis, Qataris and more can maintain a good level of living even though oil will have finally gone. Have you noticed that it is the rich Kuwaitis, Qataris and Saudis who are buying in vast quantities housing and businesses in the UK? This is to enable them to choose where and how they live and to ensure the gradual move of Islam to Europe. More and more Muslim immigrants will be encouraged into the UK and Europe, not into what will be the very essence of Islamic modern living in the world of Islam, Arabia. In short, not only has the West brought vast riches to Arabia in the form of drilling for oil and paying vast amounts of money for it, but will also pay a very heavy price when it finishes. Not for the West the finances to rebuild cities to make use of sun and assure our population of energy. For a start, the amount of sun needed to make an entire city light and airy is not available to us in the Northern Hemisphere. And secondly, the UK and Europe will soon become impoverished, looking after, paying for, educating and employing vast numbers of mainly Muslim families, unwanted by their own kind, but also seen as a fifth column into the would-be Sharia states of Europe, and thus making cities like Dubai capitals of the new Muslim world, minus the oil that has kept it going for so long. One of the reasons a suitable, cheap and fossil fuel free alternative to oil has never been marketed, invented or publicised, if indeed it exists, is that it would upset the large oil corporations, the Zionist bankers and media moguls and the Muslims. The Muslims have once again covered the alternative of their native state in new solar cities, but then they have the climate for it, and we all know that even if a fuel was found or a source of energy, it would never be free, as then all the world markets would collapse and mayhem would follow. No, something as valuable as energy from whatever source should never be free, but it should be available for all, not just for a few at a price. And as the world teeters on the brink of a religious takeover and fossil fuel famine, both from the same source, we will have to be very careful who we trust and who we allow into our social structure in the future. Bear in mind the wealthiest countries nowadays do not have massive immigration, because immigration costs too much and takes too much in the long run. We have been warned. And finally, painting the church. There was a Scottish painter named Smoky McGregor who was very interested in making a penny where he could, so he often thinned down his paint to make it go a wee bit further. As it happened, he got away with this for some time, but eventually the local church decided to do a big restoration job on the outside of one of their biggest buildings. Smoky put in a bid, and because his price was so low, he got the job. So he set about erecting the scaffolding and setting up the planks and buying the paint and, yes, I'm sorry to say, thinning it down with turpentine. Well, Smoky was up on the scaffolding, painting away, the job nearly completed, when suddenly there was a horrendous clap of thunder, the sky opened and the rain poured down, washing the thinned paint from all over the church and knocking Smoky clear off the scaffold to land on the lawn amongst the gravestones, surrounded by telltale puddles of the thinned and useless paint. Smoky was no fool. He knew this was a judgment from the Almighty, so he got down on his knees and cried, oh God, forgive me, what should I do?" And from the thunder a mighty voice spoke, "Repaint, repaint, and thin no more." I knew you'd love it. You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart, and I wish you all a very good night.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Monday, the 3rd of February 2014. Detectives investigating 50 very serious child grooming sex cases in London. New Peterborough sex ring case. Chinese New Year, BBC subtitle blunder reads, "Welcome to the Year of the Whores." Catholic France, adieu. Welcome Islam. Islamic extremism on the rise in Sweden. Total of 500 allegations within the last 6 months. These include around 40 to 50 cases of a very serious nature, a senior Scotland Yard detective said. So far, the sexual exploitation team has launched 4 separate full-scale investigations into suspected child grooming gangs as a result of the allegations. These inquiries are each said to involve several victims and a number of perpetrators. The development comes a year after 7 men from a grooming gang in Oxford were jailed for life for a horrific series of sex assaults on vulnerable girls aged between 11 and 15. Police also said that all frontline officers in the Met are to get training in how to recognise signs of grooming and child sexual exploitation. Detective Superintendent Terry Sharp, the head of Met's sexual exploitation team, which was set up 9 months ago, said, "A number of recent high-profile investigations has rightly brought the issue of child sexual exploitation to the fore in everyone's consciousness." He added, "In the last 6 months we have had over 500 referrals relating to children suspected of being sexually exploited. A victim of the Oxford sex ring is helping police in London to identify victims of child grooming gangs. The woman, who was 12 at the time when she was first assaulted, has filmed a video for frontline officers describing her ordeal and her dealings with the police. Now 22, the victim, known as Girl A, came into contact with police hundreds of times during her 3-year ordeal. All uniform officers will be shown the video in which the girl highlights how she was ignored by police. In an interview with The Standard, she told how she was approached by the grooming gangs. World at 8. These poor girls had been ignored. 700 Britons fighting in Syria terror groups, warns on land. On the highway to heaven, Ohio biker is buried in leathers astride his beloved 1967 Harley Davidson in a huge transparent casket. Jihadists flock to Turkish camps to plan new atrocities in Europe. China, slaughterhouse said to process horrifying numbers of whale sharks annually. Thought for the day, the lands of Araby. And finally, painting the church Scott style. UK News. Detectives investigating 50 very serious child grooming cases in London. Detectives are investigating 50 very serious child grooming sex cases in London. Shock new figures revealed today. A specialist unit set up to investigate allegations of grooming and child abuse has received a for years. Their sin was being white and their abusers usually Muslim, or as the plod like to say, Asian. If they'd been black or their abusers or rapists white, rich or famous, we would have heard about them years ago. They simply don't sell papers. New Peterborough sex ring case. Peterborough, 4 Asian men accused of involvement in a child sex ring in Peterborough will stand trial in Cambridge in March. Yasir Ali, 28, Mohammed Aslam, 23, Daaim Ashraf, 19 and Akash Yasin, 18 are said to have sexually abused 8 14-year-old girls. The charges include sex trafficking and rape, but the indictment, which is likely to feature more than 20 counts, has not yet been finalised. They did not appear at the Old Bailey for the hearing. World at 8.